All right. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, Mikki.
We are back, Mickey and Michelle, or Michelle and Mickey's performance podcast, and today we are going to be covering the topic of wearables. So what they are and how you can use them, the benefits, the potential drawbacks, and things, the caveats, things to consider when you are looking at some. um status, the data, the interpretation of the data that these devices are collecting. Like my overview there. There's lots of things that these devices can collect, and so we want to touch on what you get out of some of these devices. It's my overview. um, so I'll kick it off with a story. So this morning, a mutual acquaintance, a social media friend of Michelle and I's, a fellow triathlete. She is a multiple age group world championship champion winner, and an athlete that is very well versed in physiology and the mechanics and these different devices. And she posted on her Instagram stories that she had a 20-hour training week last week, training for her next Ironman. And the Garmin watch said, training status unproductive. And her comment was, I wish it would have said happy birthday. So I responded, happy birthday to her. And I said, I assume you keep this on as a chuckle. And I did for a long time too. I kept it on my watch, just to see what Garmin would tell me right after my training sessions. And she responded, yeah, absolutely. I don't know where they get these status reports. Like, how are they assessing this? And I said something to the order of like, need to hire some coaches and some physiologists, right? But she said, in the other side of this, her VO2 max is predicted to be 85. And so she said, newsflash, I would be an Olympian. And she's an age group, very, very talented age group athlete, but not an Olympian. So yeah, there are lots of benefits, and there are potentially some drawbacks on some of these different types of devices. One more quick story I will say from my own, when I got a new Garmin watch it was probably last year, I think I finally upgraded. I keep everything until it dies. I'm a very simple, like, use it until it literally does not work anymore. But I finally upgraded. And I've lived at elevation between about 8,300 feet and 8,700 feet for over 16 years now, since 2008. And when I got my new watch and I went out for some runs, the first few days, it was like, you're acclimated to 4,000 feet. The next day, you're acclimated to 5,000 feet. I live at 8,700 feet. I've lived at 8,700 feet for the last year and a half, right? And before that, above 8,000 feet for over 15 years. And it's just funny, right? Because it is like, what? I actually live here. I don't need to acclimate to this elevation. So, yeah, and I have lots of stories from athletes. I'm sure that you do too on devices, but those are my two funny, just, yeah, no.
When was it that
So,
Garmin started doing sleep tracking? Like it was a couple years, at least like 5 years ago, they started trying to do sleep tracking,
yeah,
and it started showing up. So like as coaches, when an athlete connects their Garmin to Training Peaks, right? Like we can see
yeah,
at the top of or if you turn metrics on or whatever, you can see it. And so like in theory, there's potential for that to be really beneficial, right? Like
right.
that I can go on and I can click on the little metrics thing at the top of like their Training Peaks calendar, and I can see how much did they sleep last night, what was their
Hmm.
resting heart rate, like to be able to see all of that.
Yeah.
In the way that I would use that as a coach is like to compare it to like
Hmm.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I can look at all
Hmm.
of it, and then you can see that it's going down or it's going up, or like, oh, and anyway, so there's like I could see some potential benefit there. But it was really funny because at one point I commented, this was a couple of years ago, like when the sleep thing, when it kind of first came out, and so I was really paying attention, and I commented to an athlete because it said like the metric thing on there said that she got 10 hours of sleep, and I was like, wow, right? Like, congratulations, right? Like you slept 10 hours. She goes,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know how it's tracking my sleep metrics since I take my watch off and put it on my bedside table when I go to bed. So literally, her
Yeah.
watch was like on her
Was
nightstand,
and
and it's reporting that she's getting 10 hours of sleep. And so then when you think about it, like, so then how it, like, if it's been programmed somehow to be like, if it gets sleep, then how is it going to interpret the data that it's getting, when she's out and about and moving that day? And
right.
anyway, we both just had like a good laugh about that because she was like, "I don't sleep with my watch on." So the fact that it's
Yeah.
giving me metrics or
Right.
sleep data is really fascinating. It has a
Right.
magic.
It can, yeah, I don't know. It's got some optic system that it can measure in the infrared. I could design a system to measure your heart rate on your forehead, maybe. I'm just making that up. But literally, I mean, yeah, yeah. There's one component, right? How a device measures the data. So bad data in, right, can result in poor um, analysis, right? The interpretation. And then so it's like you have to be cognizant of how is this thing collecting the data? And there are differences in these different devices. For example, and I never posted about this, but for about 2 months, back when I had the Whoop strap, and I also had just gotten an Aura ring. And I did a little bit of background research on Aura and Whoop, and I was convinced that the technology in the technology in the Aura ring was better than the Whoop, given where it's placed. So finger usually has a better sensitivity for heart rate and body temperature. It's why, pulse ox, right? You put it on your finger. And then the actual optical sensors in the Aura ring were better. They had more and of a higher quality than Whoop. And when I did that 2 month study, yeah, I mean, Aura ring better tracked, I felt, in comparison to my subjective scores, just my subjective assessment of sleep, how I was sleeping versus what the Whoop said I was doing. So I don't know did you ever do Whoop I know you had an Aura ring for a while, and did you ever try Whoop, or did you have experience with that?
I didn't, and I would say that I had a similar feeling to you in that when I was trying to decide between the two, I did whatever research I could do, just reading
Yeah.
articles, reading opinions from people who I respected and thought were smart, and they were citing as Aura being more accurate. And it said especially for the sleep data, which was the
Hmm.
thing that I was most interested in was the sleep data. But they gave a caveat and said even then the sleep data that you get from Aura, while the total time of sleep is reasonably accurate, that when you're looking at sleep staging between, is it
Yeah.
deep sleep, is it REM sleep, is just like a shot in the dark. Like
Right.
it's don't give it any credence
Right.
because like at best it's only very marginally
Right.
accurate. It's not
Yeah.
like it's not what you
Yeah.
would get if you like went into a sleep lab or whatever.
Right. Right.
So so anyway, I didn't try Whoop. I have some athletes that have Whoop. I think there's potentially some benefits to it if it's showing you trends.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's some benefit there, but to assume that the information you're getting from it is accurate is wrong.
Right. So the same could be said, I think, for the Garmin sleep, obviously.
Yeah,
And if your
for
Garmin's
sure.
on the table beside you, it is actually not doing anything. But I have worn my watch at night, and I again feel that when I have the Aura ring, sadly, I've had mine for about 3 years and it's dying. It doesn't hold the battery anymore. So when I remember to charge it, it might work. I feel again, in comparison to Garmin to Aura ring, it's still, even though I have an older generation, it's more accurate than Garmin um, for general trends in sleep. The other thing that Aura does will track body temperature. So if you're a woman still cycling, it will track, your when you might go through ovulation and go into your higher hormone phase,
That
which
I
can be
think is
helpful.
pretty accurate.
Yeah,
Don't you think that
yeah.
like the
Oh
body
yeah,
temp
yeah,
like
yeah,
when I
yeah,
used an Aura ring, I thought,
yeah,
wow, this is so like every
yeah,
month it was the same. Like where
yeah.
you just saw this like little bump in body temperature and then it stayed
And
up for
then,
2 weeks and
yep,
then you got your period and it dropped down and I was
yep.
like every month. That was really incredible.
I think for my athletes now that and as the general trend I've noticed for my female athletes and myself as well is like in my 30s and 20s, like I could train through any phase, no problem, literally no problem. And as I've gotten older, and my athletes I've worked with, some of my older athletes, 40s, 50s, that are still cycling or in perimenopause or whatever stage, they're noticing that they're having more fatigue in the back end of their cycle. And so that prediction is really helpful. Even if
Yeah.
it's it's coming and they're pretty regular, but like that spike and then like, oh yeah, well, that's why I feel like crap, or that's why I'm more fatigued, or that's why I couldn't push the power. I think it's a nice gut check as well. So I do like it for that purpose.
I think it
But
allows
yeah,
an athlete to give themselves some grace too, knowing
yes,
that
yeah,
like and this is specifically talking about the female who
yes,
is cycling and has the hormonal shifts and changes, that there it's not with everyone, but it's really common that there's a couple days where you're just not on. And for the type A athlete who's really hard on themselves, like the perfectionist type A athlete who's trying to be perfect about everything, when they're in that phase and they can't do what they usually would do, or their
right,
heart rate was higher or whatever, and then their brain starts spiraling out of control, because
yeah,
that's the same athlete that has a lot of anxiety, right? And
right,
like, oh, I wasn't perfect today. And it's like,
right,
when you know that there's this very real physiological reason behind what your body is doing, then you can give yourself some grace on that. And that's how I always coach athletes through that. I mean, it's what
hmm
I ended up doing for myself. And I would remind myself that, like, you know what, in 3 days all this is going to turn around and I'm going to feel like Superwoman, I'm going to be myself again, and it's all going to be fine. um,
yeah,
that was like comforting and allowed
yeah,
me to not beat myself up about that one bike workout that didn't
right,
go well. And by the way, if that's a trend that's happening regularly, then it's really easy. And I've done this where like you put it in on the calendar,
hmm
like an estimated date of like period's going to start, and then like
right.
I will on purpose not give a key workout in the
Oh
three
yeah,
days leading up to that, because it's like I don't want you to fail it and be mad at yourself,
right.
so we
Absolutely.
wait.
Absolutely. I've done the same thing for athletes that are willing to go into that detail and give me some predictions and tracking. And they'll drop a note in to shift it if the body
Mhm.
temperature comes up and like, oh, this month, because as we get older too, the cycle might, and we're not on any hormone or birth control, it might get a little more variable. And so I think the Aura Ring is helpful for that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but if you are having sleep issues and you are constantly fatigued, the way to do sleep studies now, many places you don't even have to go into like a sleep lab. And I just mentioned this because, um, sleep apnea can really affect your ability to recover and to train hard. And now I did a sleep study because I thought some of my fatigue issues were sleep related. They're not. It's just hormonal related. But you just put on a watch. They have these like watches now, and you put some electrodes over you, and that just tracks your, I guess, your heart rate and your breathing and your oxygen. Oh, you did have to wear a little pulse ox, and the results were really accurate. I talked to the doctor,
When
and
did
he
you
was
do
like,
that?
"No,
Did you do that recently, or was that a while ago?
no, that was probably 2 years ago. I was still in Netherlands at the time. Yeah, and I was just having a lot of fatigue. For no reason, and so I didn't think I had sleep apnea. But a lot of people that live in elevation do. I mean, there is. I had a little bit. I had like. I don't know what my percentage was. It was like 96% out of 100, right? Most people that live in Denver, like there's a high percentage, even so Denver's about 5,000 feet and Netherlands was at 8,300 feet. Now I'm at 8,700 feet. But the percentage of people in Denver that have sleep apnea is like, I want to say it's close to 50% of the population. They estimate. Now, that's not like 50% of the population have done a sleep study, but based on the sleep studies they've done, that's what they think people are actually, and it's variable, right? Maybe you don't need oxygen. Maybe you just need a little help with like a breathing, what are they called? Like a strip or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
I've never
the
used one of
people,
those. Have you ever used one of
no, I
those?
haven't. I haven't.
I've heard though that they work. Like people
Yeah,
who use
I've heard.
them like swear by them, and that the
Yeah,
only reason they don't use them more is because they're kind of expensive, to
right.
like to use regularly or whatever. But
Yeah,
people have said that they really work. So I don't know. I guess
yeah,
part of me is curious, but obviously not curious enough to buy any and
yeah,
try them.
yeah. I did have a friend that found out that she had some sleep apnea. She's also in Netherlands and did ended up doing a mask with the oxygen, and she said it did take like a couple weeks to get used to that oxygen, but then like felt better, felt like just not dead. She was like, I was just dead all the time. And I don't remember what her percentages were, like how bad her sleep apnea was, but they've linked some of the sleep apnea to increased blood pressure and cardiovascular disease and increased obesity. I mean, it's like a real decrease in life quality and potentially longevity if you have untreated sleep apnea, which I don't think my folks listen to this, but I know both my folks have sleep apnea. My sisters and I have been trying to get them to just go talk to some doctor that can give you the at-home sleep test, right? You don't have to go to the lab and sleep away and you're not, not in your own bed, but I think it's a lot easier now. So I've just taken a little diatribe, but it's good to know like some of these devices they might notify if you do have some sleep apnea, maybe Aura will pick it up or maybe Garmin would pick it up. But if you're really worried about it, you should go get with a doctor and get an actual at-home sleep test. Because it could be a game changer for overall health and certainly is going to help your performance, which is what we all want to hopefully get at, as well as longevity. um, yeah. So, with that, let's get back onto devices.
I know. I feel like we totally
Yeah.
took like a detour there.
I'm sorry. I did.
Yeah,
I did.
it was just fine. I mean, I think we
Sorry,
like to
guys.
riff here.
Yeah.
I think if we're let's talk about. So I mean, I feel like we've spent a lot of the beginning of this like talking about the negative things about trackers because like in our heads we know there's a lot of those. And so like let's circle back and get back to that later, but let's spend a little bit of time talking about like the idea of wearables and where they're potentially good. Like basically, what are we talking about here? So we're talking about your watches, the straps, the rings, potentially like a glucose sensor, like if you're wearing those. And I have stories because like my husband is just finishing up his first 2 weeks
Oh,
ever
yeah.
on a glucose monitor, so I'll tell you like some lessons that we've learned from that. And so it's like the idea being that they can help you. And I feel like overall, in my experience anyway, the best thing about tracking objective data is that it helps us calibrate and understand parts of our physiology, right? So like if you're measuring your heart rate, I mean, that's the most simple, basic one.
Yeah.
We're talking about a wearable that is one that is potentially accurate but again, not if you're, like wearing it on the wrist. So like if you're tracking heart rate, it's potentially really eye-opening to understand like how is your heart reacting to different stimuli that you're exposed to throughout the day. So that could be easy training, it could be hard training, it could be a stressful meeting at work, it could be a lack of sleep overnight, it could be dehydration, it could be your hormonal cycle, there's so many factors that affect your heart rate, and it's really, really easy to measure. And so you get a heart rate strap, and that would be a strap that goes around your chest or a strap that goes around your arm, like the Coro's armband. Those two are going to be pretty accurate. Unfortunately, the optical monitoring that happens via your Garmin on your wrist is not as accurate as we wish it was. Like, listen, as we are beating up on like, the Garmin heart rate and like all this is not because we don't want them to be accurate. Like we desperately want them to be accurate. Like if Garmin heart rate on your wrist was accurate, that would solve so many problems.
Yeah,
like
it would.
really would be great. And so we're here to remind you, if you haven't heard this yet, that the heart rate you're getting on your Garmin wristwatch is inaccurate enough to not make decisions off of, right? So like maybe it's reasonably accurate when you're at rest. You can watch for trends as long as it's on tight enough. So like if you're going to be using a Garmin watch and you want overnight heart rate and it's giving you that, have it on tight enough that there's not any extra like space between the sensor and your wrist. If that bugs you and you have a hard time sleeping because this thing is like squeezing your wrist, then like it's just not going to be accurate enough to be useful. So, but there's real benefit in tracking and knowing and understanding heart rate response at different levels of activity. And so what we're looking for, if we stick with heart rate for a minute, if we're saying, how do we best use that? The key is to get to know what are your normal values. And so, again, if we're talking about stories and, athlete examples, I mean, just this morning, I'm, reading an athlete's file, like this is an athlete who, raced on Sunday. And then on Monday just had sort of an easy spin that had some cadence changes in it. And he was noting that his heart rate seemed about 10 beats higher than what he would have expected for like an easy workout like that. And he and I are new together. So he was asking me, what's your opinion on that? And how do you see that? And I'm like, there's a lot of reasons why it could be a little bit higher than normal. It could just be that your engine is still revving high from,
Mm-hmm.
like an hour long max effort on Sunday. Right. And so like, if
Right.
that's the case and your heart rate's running a little high, then it's a good thing that you just did an easy workout, right? That you didn't go then like
Mm-hmm.
push it again. And so understanding how to look at those numbers, and if they're accurate, make decisions about how you're going to
Right.
manage yourself going forward. That's
Yeah.
a really beneficial
It's
way to
huge.
use these trackers. And so,
Right.
and I think the same thing with the Aura Ring. So I used an Aura Ring again until the battery died, which made me really sad. When I would charge it. It got to the point where I would charge it
Yeah.
right before I went to bed.
Yeah.
And then I would put it on so it was fully green. And by the time I woke up in the morning, it was dead. So it wasn't even
Dead.
tracking overnight, and I'm like, well,
Right.
now it's useless. So I'm pretty sure I just threw it away because I was like, well, I think I contacted the company to be like, is there any sort of like program that you do for like,
A
I've been a long
refurbish.
time
Yeah.
user, you know what I mean? It seems like you could be like, here's $100 off a new one, right? Because I'm also paying them a monthly $6 fee. It would seem like maybe you would
Mm-hmm.
want to keep me as a customer, but apparently they don't. So I was like, okay, whatever. Then I've learned what I need to learn from this. But if we go back and say like, what were the benefits of that, right? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
did I learn from it? And here's a huge caveat. So like a couple of the caveats, like which we talked about, is it accurate? But the caveat isn't just about collecting data. It's about modifying your behaviors
Right.
so that you make the data reflect like what you want and need it to reflect in your life.
Right.
Right. So like when you're getting data that is showing you, hey, something's off, that can be a
Yeah.
real eye opener. And then the next step is to experiment with lifestyle behaviors, with pacing in your training, with your fluid intake, with the timing of your eating, with maybe what you're eating, with the
Yeah.
alcohol that you're drinking, with the like all those things that are affecting your physiology in a way that you didn't even know because you weren't measuring before. And so the
Right.
whole like the big picture idea of wearables, I would say, probably for you as a scientist and a coach, and for me as a coach, like for sure, I love the idea of being able to measure all this
Yes.
stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like
I
yes,
mean,
let's measure all this stuff, because with this objective data, then we can start correlating subjective feelings. We can start
yes.
modifying our behavior, and when we do that, then we're helping ourselves improve. And then the data that we're collecting on the wearables is now just reflecting that, hey, the actions and the changes that you've been making are good. And then
Right.
there's a little hit of dopamine, and so we're like, cool, I want to keep going with that. And so in a big picture way, there's definitely some very real benefits to some different wearables. I think
Yeah. I
Aura
think,
Ring, is a reasonably good one. Although I'll tell you that
yeah.
like I didn't go buy another one after my 3
Yeah.
years, and I have several reasons for that, which I could share. I'm happy to share. But it was a lot. Was like I learned, I think, everything that I needed to learn, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I learned those things. And then if you were
Mm-hmm.
to say like, well, be specific, Michelle, tell us, what did you learn? Right? Like the biggest ones was like, wow, alcohol affects my system
I was going to bring that up.
way more than I thought it did. So
Yeah.
like, and that has not stopped me from drinking completely. What it does is it makes me more mindful about the
Mm-hmm.
choice that I'm making when I'm out on a Friday or Saturday
Yeah.
night and I go ahead and order the martini. Like I know for sure now what it does to my whole
Mm-hmm.
system and how long it lasts, and I'm making an informed choice that it's
Yeah.
okay. I'm just going to go easy tomorrow anyway, and like this night tonight is something that I'm willing to sacrifice tomorrow
Right.
for, and it's an informed choice that I'm making. So
Yes.
so alcohol was a really big one. The timing of my meals and my eating was
Mm-hmm.
another really big one. So like when I was watching overnight heart rate, what I found that was when I ate late or like
Yep.
within a couple hours before, because the thing is, we've heard that advice before, right? From like dietitians, people telling you, oh, you want to
Right.
lose weight or whatever, like don't eat, within 3 hours of bedtime or whatever the advice is. And that's easy to hear over and over and over, but then when you actually see the data show up on your morning graph that like, oh, I ate close to bedtime, my heart rate stayed elevated
Yeah.
until like midnight, right? Which
Yeah.
is by before it finally started dropping down into an area like where my body, because my body had all that work to do digesting
Right.
food instead of doing the repair processes that it would do if I ate dinner at 6 instead of at 8, right? And so I shifted my mealtime, my dinner time earlier,
Hmm.
and like that was a really big thing. And then I would say for me as like a, I like graphs and charts and I like making them perfect, like, and probably a lot of people who listen to this podcast are like that too. We're like, I like it to be green and I like it to like um it I was way, when I was wearing it, and even still it's lasted, I was way more disciplined about going to bed early to
Mm.
get a full night's sleep because I wanted a good sleep score. Like I just like I knew what it took to get a
Yeah.
good sleep score. And so there were times where I would be like, shut the device off, shut the lights off, like I don't need to watch the next Netflix
Netflix.
episode in
Right.
this series. Like I would turn it off because the thing that was more important to me was waking up in the morning and seeing the good sleep score. And because I knew that that also affected my physiology through the day, it would affect how healthy I am. And so I would say overall, while there were other things that I learned from the Aura Ring, those were the three biggest that I acted on.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing. Like if you're wearing an Aura Ring, and I have athletes that do this, like, or they're collecting and tracking all this data,
They're
and
not.
it's telling them, and they're not making any changes to their lifestyle. So
Yeah.
you're like, and so then the Aura Ring's just continually telling them that like your system is in a state of chaos, and they're like, I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, like, it's not like I could change the way that I live my life. Like, well, you could.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree with that. So it's actually coming up, I don't know the exact date of my 3 year alcohol-free journey. And one
Mm.
of the reasons that I gave up alcohol completely was because I saw how negatively it tanked my HRV in Oura Ring, overnight sleep scores, um, as well as like the what is that, H4V, the elite, what is that called? The other HRV tracking. It's Marco
Yeah,
Altini's,
Marco
yeah, that one,
Altini is
which we
HRV
could
for
talk about.
training. It's
HRV
HRV.
for training,
Yeah.
that's what it is. Um, yeah, so uh, for myself, I've been giving up alcohol. I think again, I always tended to eat pretty early, so that wasn't a problem, but my sweet tooth would act up. And if I
That
had
damn
sweets,
sweet tooth.
right? If I had sweets before bed, like if I, whatever, I mean, and I'm not like extreme. Well, I guess cutting out alcohol completely, some people would think is extreme. For me, I did multiple, sober October and dry Januaries. And most of the time when I was in big Ironman training, I was not drinking. Some of
Mm.
my best races, I just went totally dry for 3 or 4 months. Because I know the effects of alcohol are really not good. And I
I mean, it's
probably,
poison. Like the
it's
idea
poison.
is it's poison.
Yeah, it's
I,
poison.
there are benefits to it. Like it can make
Sure.
you, you know, what I mean, it can make a night really fun and
Yeah.
like that. And so, like, if it's just where's your
Yeah.
priority, right? Like,
Right.
it can make a
Exactly.
night really fun. It can also shorten
Yeah.
your lifespan. So, like, you
Right.
choose.
Right. And I finally, I've had some athletes that I've convinced to do dry January, and in one particular, just this last January, he had his best month of training ever. And he came back and he said, yeah, alcohol. I mean, and we're not talking excessive amounts, really. We're talking, I mean, for a guy, he might sit down on a Friday and have a couple, maybe three, and not like back to back, so you're actually inebriated. But this is the cultural lifestyle of just sort of, or just enjoying out. And I'm not, I mean, I'm not anti booze necessarily. I think there is a time and a place, but I think these devices have made people, as well as the acceptance of doing like dry January, or whatever, sober October, or just cutting it out completely for whatever reason at any point, to explore it and explore how it does impact you, if you don't have a device. And he doesn't actually have a device, so I just encouraged him to do dry January and see how he felt. And like, yeah, his training peaks was like all green, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. Um, and so where was I going with that? But alcohol, that was tracking the HRV and seeing how it tanked my HRV when I did have alcohol led me to cutting it out completely. One of the reasons. The other thing I think for me that helped me change was cutting out sweets late at night. I still have a sweet tooth, but I try to have it a little bit earlier or right around my dinner. And the other thing that helped me understand how my body was processing sugars was the continuous glucose monitor in conjunction with the Aura Ring, which I'm sure your husband is having also some eye-opening experiences there, because it is eye-opening. And I encourage everyone, especially in like, masters and above, or if you're having sleep issues or whatever, right? Like, or diabetes runs in your family. Maybe your diet is really high quality, but you've got some family genetics there to do a month of a GCM.
Yeah.
So yeah, the
Can we stick on that
yeah,
topic for a minute and
yeah,
talk
go
about
please.
the CGM?
Yeah.
Partly because there have been some advances or improvements in the technology over the last couple of years. So, like, even since I did it, I mean, I think I originally got the one from like Abbott Labs or whatever, where each sensor was $150, and so it's like that's in like somewhat cost prohibitive for a lot of people, or like, I don't want to spend that much money. And I think it's only $150 if you bought like four of them or something, so
Hmm.
like it was a pretty big investment. And with that one, you had to scan it like every 8 hours in order to
Oh,
get
right. Yeah.
the data. So the one that I got my husband for Christmas, because he had expressed some curiosity in like wanting to know what his glucose levels were, and I was watching him eat a banana every morning on an empty stomach.
Right.
Right. And then, like, so he would just get up in the morning. It was just a habit. He'd eat a banana and then he would like sit down and read the news or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, and I told him at some point, but like telling people is not the same as like seeing it on a graph. And I'm like,
Right.
that's spiking your glucose. And I don't want to be the nagging wife. And, I mean, I'm genuinely like trying to help. But it's like, I'm thinking, I know what's happening to your glucose when you just sit there and eat a banana and you think it's healthy. It's a banana. Right? Like, it's like
Right.
in
Right.
old school thinking, like that, it should be fine. And I'm not anti banana, but like, I'm watching him do this. I'm thinking your blood sugar is spiking and you don't even know it. And then you're going to have an insulin crash and it's going to come down and then you're going to want to eat all day. And so, anyway, he expressed some interest in it. I bought him this new one called Lingo. And
Okay.
it was very easy. It came and they were way cheaper. Like, so I think I spent $150 for two sensors, which again, each lasts 2 weeks, and you don't have to remember to scan it. It's like an automatic
Oh.
Bluetooth connection somehow. So it's just every time you open up the app on your phone, it's
Hmm.
updating constantly. So it was, I mean, I
That's
would
great.
say it's cheaper. It seemed just as accurate, or like in looking at the data, like it was quite good. And it was so user friendly in that he said, there was no pain in inserting it. I think his major concern about not wanting to wear it was that he wanted to be surfing and he wasn't sure if like he could surf
Mm.
with it on. And I said, well, maybe wear it at a time or put it on when the surf is low or it doesn't look like there's a swell coming. But then like toward the end of the 2 week like experience on it, go surfing, and then you'll see, because if it gets ruined, it's not the end of the
Right.
world. You still got 10 days of data or whatever. But he went surfing and it was fine. Like, he was able to
Yeah.
see.
Nice.
And so like so anyway, he learned a lot. And the app has some really good, smart information about how to manage your glucose, right? So like,
Mm.
if you're going to eat the banana, like put some peanut butter on it, like
Oh,
combine it
nice.
with
Yeah.
fat and protein. And if you eat the fat and protein first and then have the carbs later. And he was experimenting with that, where he would have like a salad first and then he would like eat
Yep.
carbohydrates and see that like the glucose spike wasn't as high, or
Right.
it didn't last as long. We saw like an insulin response every time it went up to 140, it came right back down. So I was like, well, that means you're still like quite insulin sensitive. Um, he would eat a bowl of noodles or something for lunch, and he's like, that really made it go higher, than I
Yeah.
would have thought. And like here in Hawaii, a bowl of noodles is like super, like, we do that all
Right.
the
That's
time.
very common. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like understanding, what your normal habits and lifestyle does.
Yeah.
But Mickey, really interesting, because like I tried to help him understand like the stress response, because something that I
Mm.
learned from wearing my CGM a couple of years ago, and I definitely want to go back and do it again. The highest sustained glucose that I saw in each of the 2 weeks that I used CGM was during very hard exercise. And so, like,
Mm.
whether I was feeling it or not, um, what my body did was, like, when I would start working, and I would say these are efforts that like are threshold or above, for a reasonable amount of time. So it would be like a group ride. I did like a team time trial. It was an
Hmm.
hour long max effort while I was wearing it. And my glucose would go. So it's like my body was just shoving sugar into my bloodstream, knowing that, you're really using it right now. And when we go back and we think about nervous system state, right?
Mm.
Like, doesn't it make sense that so in a sympathetic nervous system state, that's your fight or flight, like whole body system response is like, I am alert, I'm aware, I'm trying to perform, you're trying to do something. And that can be trying to like save your own life, like trying to live.
Right.
And so I found that really interesting, and I wasn't sure when I wore mine. I think it was so kind of early on with people wearing CGMs and stuff. I was like, is this normal or is something wrong with me? Right? Like I really didn't know, but I contacted a couple of doctors who were, like smart about this type of thing and knew, and they were like, that's a really healthy response. Like when you're going
Hmm.
to ask your body to do physical work like that, your body, your
Yeah.
whole system is going to respond accordingly, and your blood sugar is going to be high for that whole time. Eating to support that is helpful in that situation, right? And
Right.
so it was like he was basically like, don't worry about it, keep doing that, or like your body's fine. But at the same time, it really made me go, you know, maybe being careful about how frequently we do that to ourselves, right? So like if you're the athlete who believes in a no pain no gain, like, and
Right.
you're out, or you're not watching heart rate, and you're telling yourself that your easy pace is 8 minute pace when your half marathon pace is
Is
8:30. You know what I mean? Like you're
Yeah.
like, that's not easy. Your body is going to respond accordingly no matter
Right.
what bullshit you tell yourself. Your body is
Right.
going to respond accordingly. And so it's going to do these physiological things. Back to my husband, I did have a point here. When he was surfing, like the highest sustained glucose he had was when he was out surfing. And he would say, because like when he's surfing, he's not surfing like little waves, like he's going to the North
He's
Shore
big.
when there's big waves. And he was like, oh yeah, because I'm like scrolling through his graph, like looking at it and helping him
Yeah.
analyze it. And I was like, oh, look at that, and it was like, yeah, Saturday morning, from 8 to 11, his glucose, like the
Right.
whole thing, like the area under the curve is
Hmm.
higher during that time. And he's like, oh, it was gnarly out there, and then he uses the opportunity to tell me about like the big waves or whatever. And it's like, I just find it really fascinating and cool that that's how our bodies
Hmm.
respond. It was like your whole system. So, and he's 60. He's not new to that. He didn't have a lot of anxiety. He wasn't like
Hmm.
afraid. Like,
It's just
he's been doing this his whole life. So he's
right.
comfortable and he knows what to do. And even then, his body is like detecting existential
It's
potential threat. Like,
Yeah.
this is threat to life out
Yeah.
here in these waves and in this
Yeah.
ocean. And you are going to be physiologically prepared to handle the threat that's coming to you, and we're going to start doing all these things. And one of those things is like dump a bunch of sugar into your system.
Right.
And I thought, wow, that's just really fascinating. Anyway, the
I think
changes that you would
yeah.
make from
Hmm.
using the CGM, and like what I've done when I said I don't hate bananas, I eat my banana when I've got my helmet on and my shoes and I'm about
Right.
to walk out the door for the bike ride. Right. And I'm
Right.
about to meet my friends. I'm like, I want my blood sugar to be high right now because we're
Because
about
you're
to
gonna
do this
go.
ride together. And so I'm going to eat my
Hmm.
banana. I'm just going to eat it on my way out the door instead of first thing in the morning when I'm just going to sit down and read the news.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've certainly made similar kind of, pairing things together, like with a little bit of protein and fats and healthy carbs or whatever. Um, you know, I think it was culturally like growing up, we'd have some dessert, right? Or, and I'm not anti-sweets, right? But having that dessert 2 hours after your dinner, it really should be, clean up the dishes, then maybe sit down if you got a sweet tooth and you're still hungry, have a little dessert, and then be done for the night. And
Mm-hmm.
that response is
Portion
much better.
sizes
Yeah.
matter there too, right?
Yes.
Because you're
Yeah.
like, if you have a couple of bites of something, and honestly,
Right.
the best bites are the first ones anyway. So
Right.
the amount of self control that takes, right, to have three
Yeah.
bites of that incredible tasting dessert or whatever, it's a lot of self control.
Yeah.
But again, when you're watching the data and you
Right.
see and this is what it's doing to me, then at least you can make an informed choice, right? Like, how good is that dessert? Like, is it good
Right.
enough to like have your blood sugar spike to 170 and then
Right.
bring on the insulin response? Um, And like
Yeah.
maybe it is on times, right? And
Yeah.
if it's every once in a while, fine. But like if you can see what your habits are and you're like, I'm doing that to myself every day. Oh, no wonder I have diabetes.
Yeah. Yeah, the one
Anyway.
one comment I or one thing I noticed during I only did my GCM for 1 or 2 months, but during that time I had to give a talk, and it was just online. It wasn't
Mm.
at a conference, and I'm pretty used to giving talks. This one I felt a little bit more uh stressed, not stressed. Yeah, maybe I did. Just being on, it was a tribute to a good friend and a colleague that had passed away. And so it was a combination of science and, talking about how he influenced my science career. And it was really, I really wanted, he mattered a lot to me, and I really wanted it to be good. And so even though I practiced and I had felt like I was calm, right? Looking back at that data, my insulin definitely went up. I wouldn't say it probably was up to like a threshold level, like when you're doing a time trial, but it definitely was I remember it being about as high as what it would get to like a tempo ride, high zone two that was fasted maybe or something like that. So it wasn't excessive, but there was no reason for it. And I was just like, wow, that's my body's response to this stressful situation. And so when I have athletes that are in heavy, high work stress, I know, right? Like I know that their cortisol is probably high, but that because cortisol and there's a relationship between cortisol, insulin, blood sugar, right? So it matters, right? And so if you have a really high stress job and you even think, oh, my diet's great and I don't have any diabetes, might be interesting to just wear it for a couple weeks and see, and you got that big meeting with your boss, or you got to go give a talk on something, and how do you respond to that? Because I thought, oh, nothing, right? But then
I
looking
had
back,
I had the
like,
exact same experience where like I
yeah,
went in and gave a talk to my daughter's high school class, and it was
ah,
just about mindset and using
yeah,
words and how words matter and that kind of thing. And I used to be a teacher, so I'm
right,
used to that, but I didn't know that classroom, right? So like it was a unique environment for me, and it's been a
hmm,
while since I'd done that. And it was first thing in the morning, so it's 8 a.m. I was fasted because I thought I don't need to eat anything, and I go in there and I check my glucose at the end, and it was this giant spike. I was like,
yeah,
oh, okay, so like yeah, that's a stress response. What was funny is that like um, so people can misinterpret this too, and I'll just share with you how my husband misinterpreted. Like there was one like I think it was again back to the bowl of noodles where like he didn't want to believe that the bowl of noodles did what it did to his blood sugar, so he was like, that might have been a stress response. I was like, it was a bowl of
mm,
noodles. Like I think it only counts as a stress response if you're like, I did that fasted, right? So like
right,
there was no input that was going to make your glucose go up. But I thought okay, maybe I've done him a disservice by explaining away spikes that you don't know why as like, well, it's a stress response. And so like he's like, that must have been a stress response. What did you have for lunch? A bowl of noodles. Well, it's probably the noodles. You know,
right,
you know what I mean? Like, that's not going to be the stress response in that case.
right,
But anyway,
right,
but he was able to see too, like even overnight, there was one night where he had an issue with like an employee at work or whatever,
mhm.
where like it just thinking, do I need to fire her? And like that's hard for him, like he's
Oh
the
yeah,
boss at work, and like firing an employee is not something he ever enjoys doing, but also having an employee within the organization that needs to be fired is also like not a good, so
no,
he's tossing and turning, and he said, I didn't sleep well at all, and his glucose stayed higher overnight as
yeah,
compared to like the other nights. And
yeah,
so I think that just the whole point there is, if we go back to this big picture topic that we're talking about
right,
with wearables, is that our bodies respond to all the inputs. And it's not just the physical things that we do, but
right,
our emotional state, what we're thinking, how we're feeling. Like that physiology, that stress physiology is very, very real. And there are ways to measure it right now. And so I think
mhm,
that glucose is a really good way to measure it. HRV is the other way that you're
mhm,
really measuring stress response.
yeah,
And I think there's a lot of people that don't know a ton about HRV. I would say the majority of people have a very what was it, limited understanding of
yeah,
like what is HRV, what is it telling us? Why does it matter? How do
Right.
we interpret that data? And I feel like that might need to be like a whole thing, because
I
like we're
think,
45 minutes in here, and if I started
right.
on that, like this would be a really long
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
So maybe next week
We'll
we can
hold,
talk about
yeah.
HRV and
Yeah.
just really
We'll,
go into like all the
yeah.
things about it,
Yeah.
because it can be really helpful. But what's interesting, what I'll just share is that when I was measuring HRV, I started doing it primarily because, um, okay, so if just like keep going back to like this premise that as coaches, we are trying to help our athletes improve performance,
Hmm.
right? And there are just a billion inputs into like what could be holding you back from reaching that top performance. And there's so many things. And like on the surface, we'll talk about training, right? So like what kind of training, how much training, what's the intensity of the training, and like that feels like the biggest thing. But the reality is that at some point, and depending on what athlete you're working with, there are a lot of other inputs in there that are going to be
Hmm.
affecting your ability to recover from that training. And a big picture concept that I was coming upon toward the end of my like competitive era was like I feel like there's something not quite right about my whole systemic baseline health, right? Because like
Hmm.
I'm no longer responding to the training stimulus the
Right.
way that I did when I was younger, 10 years ago. I'm not responding to it. So like what's happening? And that's what led me into learning
Hmm.
like all of this stuff with the big picture understanding that healthy athletes are going to be the ones that respond best to training.
Right.
So then it's like, okay, so if you're not responding to training, then like let's look at all the inputs of that baseline health.
Yeah.
And like that's what got me into looking at the HRV and measuring all that stuff. And what you learn is that if there are things that are affecting your health, then your training and your performance will also be affected at some point. Like maybe not immediately, like you could get away with like some subpar behaviors for quite a while, but at some point that's going to come back and bite you in the ass. And when it
Mhm.
does, it can be really not pretty. And HRV is a way to help you understand what are the inputs there. And when I was measuring HRV, I saw with like 100% for sure the things that made it drop the most were psychological, emotional,
Oh yeah.
stress. Like it was lifestyle stuff.
Yeah.
It was not the hard training that I was doing
Yeah.
that was the issue. Although for some people it can be, and I'll share this story of an athlete that I currently have. So like she's not measuring HRV right now, but because I've measured HRV and I know, right, like how all this works, I'm watching this athlete. I don't know how to say this like properly. I don't think she listens to this, but like she was way overtraining. Like
Hmm.
where I would give an easy ride on a Friday and she would go out with her friends and they would race
Hammer.
each other up a hill because she wanted a Strava segment to show a faster time than last time. So like
Yeah.
there's an easy ride on schedule and she's like, but and then it's like, but you had a hard ride on Saturday and then a key run on Sunday. And so like she took a Friday easy day and made it a hard day because she felt fine. She felt fine. No, Michelle, was really fun. It was
Right.
fun. I went out with my friends and we just raced
Yeah.
each
But
other up that long steep hill. And she's not seeing the impact of that. And like as a coach, I'm like, yeah, but then like Saturday was a hard day. So and then Sunday, and so I was like, you should revamp that. Like you should not. Actually, I think Sunday was even a race. I was like, like so it's like you have all of these hard efforts in a row, and
yeah.
then and she did that kind of a couple weekends in a row, and I was just like, oh man, I'm just like waiting for the ball to drop here, and I am
Mhm.
imploring her, like I promise you, please take a day and go easy, and then she would just do her thing and be like, I felt great, and going out and she's hitting like peak power numbers or whatever, and and this is lasting, and I'm like, I know I'm not wrong on this. Like, and I understand that right now you're performing, but at some point this is going to come back and bite you in the ass. And sure
Mhm.
enough, like it did,
Yeah.
right? Like she had a period of 3 weeks or so where she was having fun, just letting it rip, doing her thing, and I'm like, I want you to be performing in September and October.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and so it's like balancing out that like immediate enjoyment of what you're doing right now with the ability to stay healthy enough, because I'm like, at some point when you do hard effort after hard effort after hard effort in a row, it's going to come back and bite you in the ass at some point. And like,
Yeah.
and it has been now. And she's reporting real systemic, I mean, the issues that she's reporting back to me, she's like, I don't know what's happening. And I'm like, I will tell you
I
exactly
do.
what's happening. Like, you lived in a sympathetic nervous system
Yeah.
state for weeks, where you were just living on caffeine and you were wired up and you were having fun and you were pushing your body. And even when you were tired, you thought you were a hero by doing that race anyway. And it was fun and you did well. You did well. But the crash at the end of that is so significant. And I'm like, I implore you, spend 10 minutes a day laying down with your feet up and breathing low and slow. Like, why? Because that's what brings your whole system back down into like a rest and digest state. And just like that whole big picture thing. And this is like where, you know, she wasn't wearing wearable. I mean, she had a Garmin on that was like, but that she's using in a way to like help her push and dig more.
Right.
But like,
Yeah.
at times, like those wearables really, like understanding how to use them so that, you know, today your goal isn't to push as hard as you can, but like, here's a hard cap on how hard you're allowed to go. And by the way, if that means walking, it means walking.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, that was a long
Yeah.
diatribe. Sorry, but
No,
like,
no.
I got
No.
really passionate about that because it was like I'm just waiting for
Well,
the shoe to drop with this athlete,
yeah.
and then like when the reports came through, where she's like, I don't know what's happening, all this weird stuff. Like her body is doing weird
Yeah.
stuff in a way of like it is forcing her to shut down
Yeah.
because she otherwise she wouldn't. And then she's like, I'm so tired. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, we see it a lot, I think, with the Garmins and the wearable watches. Instead of using them, honestly, it's a way to push harder. Instead of using them as a guide, which they are guides, right? There are ways to appropriately delve out the different training modalities that will get you to race day faster and healthier and more resilient and strong. But a lot of times, I mean, I don't I've really encouraged, well, no, I mean, I have said, do not mention pace to me in any Training Peaks upload unless you also comment on your heart rate or your perceived effort. I prefer heart rate because I have athletes, and this is a whole nother probably podcast that are very in tune with perceived effort and how it ties to their heart rate, and they almost don't need it anymore. And I kind of feel like I'm in the same boat.
I am. I've gotten
Yeah.
there for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I still like to look at heart rate just to have a baseline. I'm a data nerd, but I've raced without heart rate or power, and it's been almost the same as races with heart rate and power. But there are I would say most athletes don't have a real good sense of perceived effort and how it actually, like most people, I've said this before, they're like, this is easy easy ride, and it's tempo into low threshold every day. And
Yeah.
because that pace has got to be, I mean, heaven forbid it's above a 10-minute mile or whatever, right? The 10-minute mile is a big one for people. I don't know why. Like that's
barrier.
it's a real barrier.
I heard a
But
really smart guy say one time, and it's just, on that same point, he said, athletes' easy meters are broken.
yeah, they are.
Right? So, like, you have a meter in your head and you're calling it easy. And I fully fell into that for a long time where I was kidding myself and saying that it was easy when my heart rate's 160. And it's like, had I been measuring heart rate. But also, by the way, I had a coach one time, Mikki. I will not mention his name. I had a coach that told me that monitoring heart rate was screwing with my head and that I should take my heart rate monitor off and just go by feel. And so I did that for like a long time. I was not improving. I was not getting better. And I'm thinking, and this was after I'd worked with smart coaches who were like, you should like listen to your heart rate. So I put my heart rate monitor back on. I went out and ran like 10 miles and I saw how high my heart rate was for what I was calling my easy pace. And I wrote to him in my notes, like, I figured it out. Like, I put my heart rate monitor back on, and like, this is really clearly the issue
Hmm.
here. That, you know, my heart rate's 160. I'm running 930 pace. No wonder, right? Like, here we go. And he wrote back. He's like, take that off. It is messing with your head.
Yeah.
And the thing is, at the time, like, I was still paying him, and so I was like, all right, maybe, you know, let's keep it until I like failed enough races. Like, and I was just like, all right, I'm out. I think that was actually the start of like the overtraining, you know,
Yeah.
thing that I went through, where you're just like going by feel when you don't have a, when you
Yeah.
haven't, I don't
Developed. It's
know.
something you develop, it
Yeah,
can be
I feel like
developed.
having the
Yeah.
cap, like, I don't
Yeah.
use heart rate a lot of times for their hard efforts. When it's a hard effort, just go
Right.
hard. You can
Just
do that
go.
by feel. But
Right.
in my mind, the key reason to use heart rate is to cap yourself and be honest on your easy days.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing an easy day and not using heart rate, you're likely going too hard. And I would
Yep.
be 9 out of 10 times, an easy day by feel is harder than an easy day by heart rate, 9 out of 10 times.
Yep. Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing, that I think that we don't use the devices to their best capabilities because of that obsession with going harder, no pain, no gain.
Mhm.
And the other thing is for folks that are not working with a coach, because I get this a lot, especially with my newer athletes, or sometimes even the athletes I've worked with for a long time. But so Garmin, for example, and I'm most familiar with Garmin. I don't know about Sunto, or some of the other watch brands, but it's so they're giving you this guidance, right? If you turn the what is it, the maybe it's, I can't remember, you had to like, I had to search down through the layers of like how to figure out how to turn it off, right, to get this productive
Yeah.
status or overreaching or all this bullshit, right? So one, you, let's assume that it's collecting good data. You're wearing a heart rate strap, versus just the optical monitor, and you've got your threshold set in your zones, and you've appropriately set your zones to the best of your ability in Garmin. Then okay. So most people aren't doing that. So we don't. They're taking the standard. Like I think it comes, and Training Peaks does this too. Like your max heart rate, everyone's max heart rate standard is 200. Like you're 75 years old, but your max heart rate's still 200. Okay.
Yeah.
So
And
if you
resting is
want,
60. Resting is 60.
right,
Yeah.
resting 60. So if you want to use some of this guidance, this stock guidance, and I'm going to actually say you shouldn't be using it at all, but for another reason, but you want to have these zones set up as accurately as possible. If you're unsure how to set them up, well, maybe reach out to Michelle and I, we can maybe give you some guidance there. The other thing though, and this is as a scientist, my real beef with, some of these companies, and maybe it's especially Garmin because it just seems so prevalent. Like I get screenshots of athletes Garmin statuses like, oh, it says I'm unproductive, right, to use that one, when I just had a 20-hour training week. That's such, like, what in the hell? What in the actual hell? Or the last one I got was anaerobic development, or what was it? I can't remember what it was, like
Shortage. They call it
anaerobic
anaerobic
shortage.
development shortage. Like
Right.
you need to go
Right.
harder more often.
Right. And so this athlete is a new athlete. We're Ironman focused. I'm not going to start an athlete with a bunch of anaerobic work, VO2 max work. We do that occasionally, but I mean, and she's training really, really well, really well. We're doing some tempo. We're doing some, again, like what's Ironman, or not Ironman, I'm sorry, Garmin, or these wearables, like, should take into consideration, like, what is your focus, right? If you're an Ironman athlete, you might not need to have more than, like, I don't know, 10 to 20% VO2 max anaerobic work at any one time. It is important to do. And we did a whole episode on, on HIIT workouts, right? So, but the other thing is the algorithms that they use are proprietary, right? So we can't, as a coaches, go in and say, how are they making these assessments? We don't know. And from my opinion is they also do not have coaches or physiologists on their staff to guide them in these automated, productive status, training results. The other thing, I think I still have one of the guidance on my Garmin, because when I go for a run, depending on which route I choose, so one route I basically go straight up a mountain, the other route I go straight down a mountain. If I go straight down a mountain, my heart rate's very low, and my pace is very quickly, and it comes back and it says, I don't know what it says.
Yeah, your heart rate +4 or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's like +4. You're really doing well, right? But the next day I go run up a mountain, it's like, oh, -4. Like, you're really not doing well. It's like, Oh my God, right? Like, but there, I think unfortunately, especially, I mean, I tell my athletes, please turn all these things off. I mean, if you want to
Hmm.
keep them on for a chuckle, like our friend who's the world-class athlete, do so, but just know they're totally inaccurate. They are absolutely inaccurate. And if you're a self-coach person, you feel like you need to use this guidance, like just stop, don't.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
not helping you at all.
Yeah.
So,
I know. I totally agree.
yeah.
Mine is funny too. And mine, it, I guess it tells me, I don't look at it very often. Every once in a while I'll look at it. But I mean, even something as simple as this, like I ride my trainer during the week and I ride outside on the weekends. I
Mm-hmm.
don't use my Garmin when I'm doing my
Right.
indoor training workouts, right? Because
Right.
like I'm using Zwift, it's connected to Training Peaks, it has a smart trainer, so like it can manage all of that. So like my Garmin doesn't know about my weekday rides. And so that in and of itself
Right.
negates any ability for my Garmin to tell me about my training status, my
Right.
stress level, it doesn't know because it doesn't know if I had a hard week training inside or if I did three lit
Right.
style low heart rate spins, right? Like it doesn't know. And so it's trying to tell me something that it's like you don't have all the information, so you don't get to make any sort of assessment about my current state. I remember even with the Aura ring, and like you
Yeah.
probably had this too. Like I told it that I was an athlete. I told it that my goal was to improve performance. And every single day for 3 years that I wore that thing, it told me that I was doing too much activity. I mean, it's
Wow.
just like
Right.
an
Yeah.
athlete has to train. It was like, oh, you've moved too much, right? Like you should
You
rest
got to
more.
stop.
Like it was
Yeah.
always telling me to rest more, and I'm like, how does a competitive athlete like? I mean, there were weeks where like I would only put in like 12 hours, which I would say only 12, but like for a high level athlete, so a 12-hour week is not a big
Yeah. It's
week.
not a big week.
So
Yeah.
like if the aura is still telling me that I'm
It's too much.
overtraining at 12 hours a week when I told you my goal is to improve my athletic performance, then whoever programmed and this is the point that you're getting to is like
Yeah.
where did that algorithm come from? Who
Yeah.
programmed that algorithm? Because whoever did thinks that exercising for 12 hours a week for every human across the board is too much.
Yeah. And that's
And you're
that's a
like,
problem.
that's
Yeah.
not, right?
That's
So, like, and that's why we can't listen to any of those.
right.
Like, it
The-
doesn't know us. And you can see the dilemma that these programs have, too.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you took, like, we're rare, Mickey. Like people who exercise as much as triathletes do.
Yeah.
Like, we're not the general
Yeah.
population. And, these companies are selling their product to general population people. And so for some of those people, like they're just trying to get them to exercise 3 hours a week. And like, that's, you know,
Yeah.
I don't
And
know, maybe a goal or whatever.
maybe
So
it,
it would be hard to get the algorithm right for every athlete because it could really be very discouraging for people who are just starting an
Mhm.
exercise program to have your Garmin continue to tell you that like do more, like you're not exercising
Right.
as much as Mickey is, so you need to do more,
We need to
right?
do more. I
So
know.
like
Yeah.
the idea of any wearable like this serving everyone from general population all the way
Right.
up to ultra endurance athlete it's never going to happen, which means that as athletes we need to do that for ourselves and not depend on the
The
device.
device. Yeah. The other thing, and not to sell a product, because I'm not I've used Training Peaks for a long, long, long time. But if you are an athlete that's self-coached that has been using like Garmin or Strava to sort of assess your fitness, I would actually encourage you to check out Training Peaks because they have developed, well, Strava's, I mean, they're both developed for athletes, but um, you have a lot more control in your zones, your thresholds, setting your thresholds to monitor your progress in I would say, a much more intuitive way. And it's much, they've been developing tools for a long time to describe. Now, Training Peaks is a lot of their algorithms they are also not publicly available, but they, in theory, are simple enough that you can understand how they are getting at like your TSS, total training stress score, or your CTL. We could do a whole podcast on all the Training Peaks bells and whistles. There's free version and there's a premium version of Training Peaks, but that way all of your data in theory is collated into one place, and it can upload your Aura through the HRV training app, so you have your sleep data in there as well. And again, I'm not affiliated. I mean, I use Training Peaks, but I'm not affiliated. I'm not trying to sell it, but it
Yeah.
is a
They're not
smarter
paying us.
way.
We're
They're
paying
not.
them.
Yes, we are right. But I do think that, Strava's trying to get there, but the whole social media sharing, I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms, which we're not going to talk about right now. But, um, so yeah, it's in theory, to recap, right? Like, I mean, do we have any other devices we've missed that people use a lot that we should cover? Garmin was a big one for me because I get the screenshots of like,
Yeah.
oh God, coach, I'm failing.
No, I
And it's like,
I think that the like if there's like no, I think the major ones are, your watches, your the sleep tracker, like lifestyle so it would be like Aura, Whoop for like sleep tracking, lifestyle stuff. Garmin and its competitors. I'm also a Garmin person, so I can't speak
yeah.
to like the other products, those things. And then like a continuous glucose monitor. Those are the things that we're wearing. I mean, there's other things like your NIRS devices. I don't feel qualified to speak on that, and I don't think we need to be because it's so rare that people would be using something like that. So I think as far as like the types of wearables, we covered it. I think that the idea, like if we're going to summarize, we would say that there's potentially great benefit
Mhm.
in measuring your physiology, because if you understand the data that you're seeing
Mhm.
and it's being measured accurately and you are willing to take action on the data you're seeing, then track the progress across the board to see like
Mhm.
did the action that I took make it better or worse. And
Right.
so like if those things are in place, then monitoring the trends of data that come from your wearable devices can improve your health, which in turn improves your performance. Right. So like
Absolutely. Yeah.
that would be like, that's best case scenario. That's what we hope for. In the real world, what we find is that athletes don't always understand the data that they're seeing. The data that's being collected isn't always accurate,
Mhm.
and they're not always willing to make lifestyle changes and modifications
Right.
in order to address these things. And so therefore in the real world, it's not they're not as beneficial as we wish they were.
Yeah.
And the major cautionary tale that I think, or like how there's several ways you could hurt yourself wearing wearables. And then maybe that's something we need to touch on before
Yeah.
like we finish, is that
Yeah.
if you're making decisions on device that you're getting from a wearable and it's not being tracked, like the data is not accurate, then you're likely hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So like really look, if you're like, I'm that type A athlete that I want to use this data and I'm willing to make the changes, Michelle, then make sure that the data you're collecting is accurate. Don't use wrist heart rate. It's not accurate. Like
Yeah.
have a real HRV measuring device. Your Garmin is not one, and neither is your Apple
Right.
Watch. And we'll talk about
Right.
that next time.
God, Apple Watch.
Right. Like that's not like, you
No.
can't make decisions off of that data because it's incorrect. So therefore the decision, the choice you make will also be incorrect. The other thing is, if you are the type of person, and we can I'll share this story with you, that gets that lends maybe too much credence or develops anxiety from seeing data that
Mhm.
isn't good, right? Or like if we
Whatever.
right, and that can range from, like, I have athletes that deal with a lot of anxiety. They're living in a high fight or flight state. Every time they go out on an easy run, their heart rate immediately snaps up to 160, and they're like, the only way to not do this is to walk. And I'm like, it's because your body's telling you should be walking, right? Like your stress level from some source, it's not coming from that run, it's coming from somewhere else. It's so high that you addressing that at baseline is going to be the way before you're going to improve otherwise. if you get really emotionally involved, because what can happen is then when you see that heart rate high, and then you go into a spiral spin out, and then the heart rate goes even higher. And probably that's what that one coach who told me, like, the heart rate's messing with your head, take it off. Like, he probably thought that my heart rate was lower when I wasn't watching it, but that wasn't the case. Like, it was actually high, and I was telling myself that it was easy when it wasn't, and that was the problem. But even then, like, I actually had a friend of mine that just recently, like 2 weeks ago, he sent me a text message. He got a new Whoop. And I guess with that, like, they're trying to, like, hey, get your friends on Whoop too, right? And so here's a free month on Whoop. And so he thought he's doing me a favor by sending me this text message that, like, here, use this link and you can get a month free of Whoop. Isn't it right? They'll just send you one and you're like, you can use it for free. Delete that text. I didn't even respond. But then when I saw him later, he's like, hey, did you get my text? And I just started laughing and I was like, all right, here's the deal. I'm fully aware that my nervous system state is on a razor thin edge right now. Like, I've been watching
Yeah.
the news and I'm a disaster. So, like, the
Right.
last thing I need is some device telling me right now that, like, my nervous system is on a razor's edge. I know it is. So, like, it's not going to help me to see that
Yeah.
data that shows me that my physiology is in the gutter. I'm just going to keep walking every day. I'm going to keep breathing. I'm going to keep doing all the things that, like, I
Yeah.
know I need to do. I don't need to see bad news from a wearable right now because I'm not in a spot where, like, that would be helpful for me. The only reason I know that is because I wore
You've
one
done it.
before and I
Right.
know, and I, at this point, like, I know my system well enough. I know myself well
Right.
enough, my nervous system. And if you're paying attention to the news, likely your nervous system as well is, like, on a razor's edge. And
Yeah.
so, being aware of that is one thing. Having it in your face because a device is telling you and giving you red numbers and telling you you're in the gutter every day, like, I don't know that that's really helpful in this current situation. Like, you're probably better off just to know that you're in the gutter and
Right.
act accordingly without actually having the number in your face. It's
Yeah.
kind of like an easy run when you're like, I know I'm not fit right now and I just need to go put in the work at the right level, and I don't need to see 11:30 pace on my Garmin because, like, that'll just
Just
piss
turn
me
it
off.
off.
Great.
Yeah.
Leave the Garmin at home and run easy
Hmm.
by feel. Do it by your breathing. Let it be slow. If you don't even have to know how slow it is because it's the right thing for your body. Um, anyway.
Yeah, I encourage my athletes to not. I give data free runs. Like,
Hmm.
all of us know a route that's 3 or 4 miles, 2 miles, whatever. Like, you can go do that without your watch, and I encourage you to do it without your watch. Leave it at home. And I
Hmm.
can't. Sometimes people will take me up on it, sometimes people won't. But they say they turn the watch off. I encourage pace off watch all the time, unless the workout calls for pace. It should really be on, time and heart rate, maybe distance, but that's you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. I had a comment. I made a comment to someone posted another Ironman athlete and coach, and they've got some big races on the schedule this year, and they are pretty politically aware, let's just say. And we had a little chat right on the socials about the state of the nation for people that are deeply concerned. And I said, it'd be fascinating to do a cortisol, right? Like Inside Tracker, some big company, like anonymous, of course, but look, what's your cortisol? How has that changed post election and inauguration? And I would guarantee, it probably has gone up. And she actually responded saying, I'm actually afraid to get my blood work done because I'm sure my cortisol is through the roof. And that's real, right? And I think it's, while you don't need a wearable telling you that, it also probably needs to be something you accept about the current times, and you might need to take more recovery, honestly. It might mean you
Not
can't
even
train
might.
as much.
Like, you
You probably
definitely
shouldn't,
do.
right? Like, I leave it open to, yeah, I'm not going to say for sure, but yeah, I mean, if I had a big Ironman on the schedule, I think, I know that it would be, the current status of our country would be impacting my ability to recover, you know?
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's reality, and you have to
Yeah.
accept it to move forward with whatever you want.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
heart
Well, let's
rate,
leave
heart
it there then,
HRV.
huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wouldn't
It's
be just
really good.
cortisol. I would say like any of the big systems, right, that are tracking HRV and heart rate and, the stress indicators of our lives. I would be fascinating to do a large data study on how things have rolled out, and, if you could anonymize it versus, with some, in some way, right?
Yeah. They look at those
Um,
trends, I think. Like, I mean, HRV for training collects all that data
yeah,
and
they
it's
do. Yeah.
aggregated at like a population level.
Right.
So that, and that's how they get their norms for like age
That's true.
group and
Yeah.
sex and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they definitely have that. It would be interesting. Is I think even Whoop has done that kind of thing because with Whoop you can check on the app in the morning like I drank alcohol last night or I'm getting
Hmm.
sick or whatever to help you understand what you're
Right.
seeing. As and we'll talk about that more next time. But
Yeah.
they are able to then make conclusions that like at the population level here's the effect that alcohol has on
Right.
your physiology. It would be really interesting to be like like since January like watching
Right.
everybody's HRV just drop
It
into the
just
gutter.
tank, just tank.
Like what
I know. Yeah, we can't probably speak for. I'm sure that there are athletes that are overjoyed, and I can't speak for them. So, but I know a lot of
they're
in
not
my.
listening to us, Mickey.
Yeah,
We
they are
sure
not
not.
listening. We've ostracized them, which is fine. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Yeah. Without diving down too much of that, but I think a good topic will be HRV next time, next week, whatever.
Yeah,
Whatever
and
we're going to
just
talk next.
basically
But
like nervous system state,
yeah,
and
that'd
because
be
what
good.
we're looking at is an indicator of health, and like if you're looking
Yeah.
for longevity, you're looking for performance, like it matters in a way that is so overlooked by people, like whether you're measuring it or not, it's
Right.
real whether you're measuring it or not.
Right.
So like that's the other thing, like just because you're not measuring your heart rate doesn't mean that your heart rate isn't
Yeah.
trying to tell you something. Like your
Right.
physiology doesn't lie. Our brains lie to us all the time, but physiology doesn't lie, and your body will tell you what's going on. And you could then it's like, what do you got to do with that information? Is key. But
Right. Right.
anyway,
Okay.
adios. Let's end on that.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody, and tune in another, I guess, 2 weeks for HRV and maybe some heart rate stuff. And if you have other topics, let us know. We would love to hear from you on other things you want to hear from us about. So,
Yeah.
all right. Thanks,
All right.
Michelle.
Bye bye.
Bye.